Okay, and welcome to Happy Hours for February 27th with me. I am Eileen Cook, and I am, as they say, the mistress of craft, or at least that's what my coworkers called me, so I let them put that in the bio.
I like it.
So it works for me. So we were jumping in. So Christy, you were saying that your writing has been going well, but going in some unexpected places?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's that what you have always proposed to me is just allowing yourself to meander a bit and knowing that you may end up cutting stuff, but that it's important to meander. And like you were chatting about last week, kind of pulling in perhaps backstory or perhaps other parts of the story that you know that may not end up in the final, but it helps you get somewhere. And that's what I'm finding is I'm just kind of allowing that to happen. And I'm finding different routes now that my main character, Sam, is taking. And as I was saying earlier, it's not like a total change, but just the realization of how things actually work. Because I think there's a lot of it that I, of course, have orchestrated, I hope, right? But there are other things that just kind of happen. And I'm like, oh, okay, so how is that going to work? And now I'm happy via these meanderings. Yeah.
Sounds good. I'll say welcome to Crystal, who just sort of jumped in and joined us, so waving hello. So I am going to sort of jump in what you were talking about, Christy, in that it came up with an SFU student, as you know, this week, where the student was asking, which I think is a good question here. She's like, how do you know if you're sticking to the story that you need to tell and hitting the beats that show up in things like the hero's journey and the writer's journey, versus that you're just meandering? And how much meandering is okay versus how much is then distracting? Which is a really hard question to answer in the abstract if you haven't read somebody's pages. So it's a little bit hard to answer, but I gave an example that I hope is useful for people, and I compared it to a road trip. So when you ask someone to read a book of yours, you're asking them to go to a particular destination. So I'm going to use the example that you are asking somebody to go with you to Seattle. And if you get into their car and they say, rather than go down I-5, which is a direct way to Seattle, I was thinking that we would take a little bit of a scenic journey. You're probably okay with that, as long as the scenic journey is interesting and actually, in fact, scenic. But the more that you're taking people away from that main journey, so the more you're like, oh, hey, let's pull over. There's a Trader Joe's here in Bellingham. And, oh, by the way, this place has a great, ice cream store if we get off at this exit. And, oh, I happen to know this rest stop has the best dog park. Like every time you're taking people off the main road, you are trying to find a balance between making that interesting enough that it feels like a useful way of getting off the highway. Or you also run the risk that they become more interested in the side journey than they are in the main journey. So whenever possible, if you're taking a side trip, it should be because you're stopping to pick up something that's going to be useful for the rest of the journey. So we're stopping at Trader Joe's because we need to pick up road snacks, which we're going to need later because traffic outside of Seattle is going to be so horrible. We're going to be starving and hungry and need that. So if you're pulling people off the journey, that you're giving them some purpose, or at the very least, making it scenic and interesting to be there. So that's the goal. So Cynthia, how's your writing projects coming along?
So you know what? I set the ultimate challenge for myself these 2 months because I'm on hiatus. I don't know quite what to do. So I have multiple projects running in parallel, and it's a bit schizophrenic because one is my grandmother's work. She left a bunch of family stories that she had written out. And so I have been transcribing those and then kind of weaving them together into a story.
So there's that project that I've been working on. And then I'm also writing a thriller, a murder mystery, which is not for young adults. It's for older people, and it has a lot of complexity. And so those two things they couldn't be further apart, I think, in terms of content and genre and all kinds of things. And I'm, sort of dividing my day between those two projects right now. So, but.
And I actually enjoy sometimes having multiple projects on the go, provided they're different enough from each other. If they're too close, I feel like it almost saps the same creative energy. But otherwise, if they're a little bit different, it can be like, oh, this sounds like fun. And then when I get stuck on project A, it's like, no problem. I'll turn that off and go work on project B.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge believer that we tend to think of writing as only getting words on the page. And Crystal and I actually had a great conversation about this just the other day around everything is sometimes a part of that writing journey. So if you are, soaking in the sites and you're thinking about visuals, or you're doing research, or, sometimes you're working on something else and your brain then is solving a story problem in the background. And then when you come back to it, it makes perfect sense. So that's I like sometimes having the multiple projects, but as always, as I say every single time I think in here, if that doesn't work for you, it's not you, it's just your writing process. So I think it's always useful to, to try different things, and, you try them, some of them work, some of them don't.
Yeah. So far it's working, I think. So, but it's a bit, it's a stretch for me because I'm used to having this sort of other pace, which is, very, manana. And I've set myself some really strict timelines, and, I'm working on from an outline, which is the first time I've done this. So
forward.
Yeah. Forward.
So Crystal, how goes your writing projects?
I'd like to think I'm in that mulling things over stage, not to be confused with the just doing nothing stage. Yeah.
So how are you telling the difference between those two things?
That is an excellent question. I think the key is going to be after this little session here, when I leave, am I writing words or not? That's going to be the defining piece. I can feel that I'm closer. It took a while for this story to kind of settle in for this one, and it took a bunch of weird turns I wasn't expecting. So I think that I'm about to, but have not quite passed the line of research versus stalling. So
yeah. Fair enough. There's a fine line.
Yeah.
And Bonnie, how about your writing? How go the dragons?
Oh, well, actually really good, because I was doing a lot of mulling and outlining and re-outlining and re-outlining. And I finally hit the stage where I just like, okay, I know what I want to do. So I've been plowing through. But of course, every day when I go to write the next chapter, I peek at the previous ones and they soak up some of my time because they have to be fixed. And I'm trying not to do that and keep moving forward. But yeah, I'm making progress. I feel like I have a much better handle on my 17-year-old dragon male. Lots of conversations, interesting conversations with my husband.
Trying to understand the male brain is a
Yes.
very interesting process.
Yeah, so I'm quite excited. It's a fun stage.
So one thing that can help if you find that you kind of keep going back to the previous day's work is at the end of the day, save it as February 27, dragon. And the next day you open a new page and it's February 28th, dragon. And eventually you'll cut and paste all of them into one shiny document. But sometimes if you have to act like, it's not as easy as just scrolling up. But
Well,
you
I
have
work
to
in
actually.
Scrivener.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to open different binders for every project so that you can
That would be
go back.
tricky, yes.
But it could be done.
I know. And it just takes a little bit of self-control. We all have
Cynthia says
right?
as she takes a drink.
I know. Self-control, girls.
Having the wine with that makes it perfect. So
It's happy hour. You said it was happy hour, not
I
office
did
hour,
say it
so-
was happy hour. So Leslie, how about your writing this week?
I've also been doing a lot of mulling and stalling, and because I'm revising and I'm telling myself this is the last round of revisions, and I have 56 pages out of 330 that I like, but I really stuck because I think I'm afraid that if I mess it up this time, I'm going to have to give up, right? So I think there's a little bit of psychological stuff going on in there. I do a lot of thinking. I have all these great ideas and I write these things in my head. Then I sit down at the computer and then I just go back and read what I rewrote. So I'm really stuck right now. And I have a lot of projects on the go, but I refuse to let myself go work on those until I get through this sticky part right here. So
What do you think would unstick you?
Writing. I'm rewriting the first 65 pages because they were not working, and that's the feedback that I was getting. Everybody loved the story, but they wanted things to happen sooner. So I'm actually kind of at the point where I have to join the two pieces together, and I have to figure out how to transition everything. I don't think I'll have as heavy revisions through the rest of it, but it's this big transition that I'm really struggling with.
So my advice would first off to be to stop saying to yourself, this is the final revision and I either get it right now or I never get it right, because that puts a lot of pressure on you. And what I can tell you is every time that I think that I am done, I discover that I am not. And either, an editor or my agent or someone comes in, to the point of even published books, I look back at them now and I think I could do that different or better. So to tell yourself, I am on one of what may be many more revisions or maybe the last revision, but to not put the pressure on.
Great. And
the second thing is, I don't know if you've ever seen the thing where, I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's something like the tomato thing.
Rose, I lost you.
Frozen.
I can't.
Frozen again.
You.
Okay, you're back.
You're back.
I'm back. So
Tomato thing.
Something.
and then nothing. Yeah. I forget where it comes from, but the idea is that you set a timer for 30 minutes and you just work for that 30 minutes. And then when the timer goes off, you can stop, or you can actually reset and do it again for another 30. But sometimes that process of just having a timer makes you work through it, if that makes sense.
I'll try. I like that. I used to do that with my daughter when she gets stuck with all her learning disabilities. We would say, okay. And then we'd say, nope, you're not allowed to work longer. And then of course she wanted to. So
yeah, it is a way of kind of fooling yourself, which is useful.
Yeah.
But I have something that might be helpful for everybody and where they are. So hang on.
Ooh, writing tools.
Craft book. Everyone loves craft book. So it's the 10th anniversary of Writing Tools, 55 Essential Strategies for Every Writer by Roy Peter Clark.
I only have 50. I must need to get the new book.
Yeah. He came up with 5 more.
Oh, right.
You'll have to handwrite those in.
Yeah, you can just staple them in the back.
Notes.
That'll be fun. I do have to say, he has really good practical advice if you're looking for just that very set. And he's almost comes at it from a journalistic point of view. He himself is a journalist, so I think that's partly where that's coming from. But so, for example, he has nuts and bolts. So he has things like exercise 2 is order words for emphasis. So the idea that you're starting sentences with strong verbs, actions, and ending them with strong verbs, talking about passive verbs, cut big, then small, just various kind of very specific ideas. But I was intrigued by one of his that I think would be interesting, which is he talks about drafting a mission statement for your work. And he opens by talking about he did a multiple book or multiple article series on a woman with whose husband had HIV. So this was one of those things where it appeared in the paper for, once a week for multiple weeks. And he had a really interesting saying of it was such a big project that he needed to find some way to break it down. And he decided to do that by kind of coming up with a mission statement. I think I locked up. There we go. I was like, I'm locking up again. He wants to do this so people could care for and identify with people, that it would be easier to see people with HIV as not the other or outcasts. He wanted to advance the conversation about sexual culture and its impact on public health. He thought about the format that he wanted to do. I want to do a serial narrative in newspapers with very short chapters. So he had kind of a really clear idea of what is it that he wanted to accomplish in that. So I thought it would be interesting. Do people have thoughts about what would be in their mission statement for the project they're working on? If you could, at the end of it, when someone closes the book, oh, that was such a great story by Cynthia.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because I for the first time have used like a template for my outline, and within that have done these character sketches, really thought about the scene, the props, the timing, sequencing, all of these things. And I did think I want short chapters. I want multiple point of view, which is something I've never done. I want action from the very first chapter to the end, so that, you know, people are like turning their heads like, what the hell just happened? Like, you know, whoa. So I've set those kind of challenges for myself. But I haven't formulated it into a mission statement per se. But I think, you know, I have these little bullet points that I could sort of pull into something like that, which makes a lot of sense. I think if you have a target you're working towards, it's really helpful to have thought through how you're going to get there, or, you know, stay so that you stay within that, within your purpose or your goal.
Well, and I think some of that is even thinking about tone or feeling. Like, you know, we've talked about the book, which I just loved. Eleanor Oliphant Thinks Everything is Completely Fine. And the tone in that book, which is a lot of humor, but it becomes very dark. And I think the author did that in a very interesting way, where it's sort of light, but you're getting these hints that there's something much darker that has happened in this character's past. And you're sort of then being slowly pulled into it. So I think it's interesting to take a minute and say, and just do this now, like just a bullet point, like what are some of the emotions I want people to feel as they're reading my book? And where I think that becomes useful and helpful is then as you're going back, either in the revising or if you're writing the next scene, is asking yourself, how well does this scene tap into those emotions that I'm wanting to bring up? And if one of the emotions, for me, for example, writing thrillers, so this may be similar for you, Cynthia, is I want a sense of unease. I want a sense that as the reader, you can't necessarily trust what anyone is saying. So again, and for me, you know, I try to do this as I'm writing a draft, but I acknowledge in my own head that I can't keep all these balls in the air. But then when I'm
Oh dear.
I wonder if when it records, it's just still like that.
No, I don't think.
there we go.
There you're back.
Back.
There's always a moment where I realize everyone's either extremely still around talking to myself.
No eyes are blinking.
Yeah, like because my video still shows me moving. It's the rest of you that lock up. So I'm sort of like, that's strange that none of them are moving. So I'd say it's something that, I kind of then go back and try and figure out if, I'm actually hitting that emotional beat. So I think, asking yourself, what are the emotions? And that may be in different sections. So it may be like in the first third of the book, I want fear. In the second third of the book, I'm wanting that to become something else as it sort of moves along the story. And that's fine. Like, it doesn't have to stay the same. That's up to you how you want that to go. So I think asking yourself about emotion. Is there anything you want your reader to walk away having learned about? So again, we're not necessarily writing journalistic articles where we're trying to educate someone on, all the causes of HIV or so forth. But often for a lot of us, there is something that we spend a lot of time researching or thinking about that we want the reader to necessarily think about. So for myself, for example, if I think about my book, The Hanging Girl, the main character, Skye, is a fake psychic. And so I did a lot of research around sort of that area. So I did want to sort of communicate without hitting people over the head, like how easy it is to convince people of something when it's something that they want to hear. And in an age now where, politics is fake news and, we sort of talk about all of that, like to some degree, it wasn't a book designed to train people to become critical thinkers. Like, at the end of the day, it's supposed to be a thriller. But that is something that I wanted people to maybe walk away with a greater understanding of, oh, if people finish this book and they know more about psychics and how someone could fake that, that feels like a win to me. So I wondered if people want to take a moment and be like, if someone was to learn something from your book, what might that be?
We're all just quiet. We're not frozen.
Yeah, I'm watching you all. Like, are people blinking? Are they? Just periodically, you could make jazz hand
Just to let you know
that you're still there. That would be great. And again, thank you, Crystal. Don't get caught in trying to be like, oh, I have to educate. But there's often something that's going on in the background of your book. So maybe you're teaching them about grief and loss, or maybe you're teaching them about self-respect or abusive relationships and how you can get caught into one of those. So thinking about, like, is there something educational from that? I think another interesting thing to think about is your main character. What do you want people to think about your main character? If they were to describe your main character to another reader, how would you like them to make that description? And then the next thing I think to think about related to that is to start
thinking audio.
Don't? Oh, we do.
We do. Oh dear.
Maybe try. You can't. Yeah. Okay. One sec. If she can't hear us,
I can hear you now.
Well,
for a while. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just had Cynthia with her fingers in her ears, frozen like this.
I didn't have any audio for a while. I don't know what happened.
Okay, well, we're back now.
Sorry, okay.
Nope. So then next thing, I'm just thinking of people listening to this later, it's going to be like, there's all these weird moments. Just if when those happen, thanks.
oh, she's frozen. Technical challenges.
Hi, Bonnie.
There must be a lot going on this happy hour because
Okay.
it's not
So,
She's back. No.
Everyone who has a drink of wine freezes.
yeah. I hope not. That would be a bad thing.
It's the new rule.
Bad rule, bad rule.
Okay, I'll try something else.
I do think the next thing to think about is actually structure. So thinking about how would you like to tell your story? So, as Cynthia was pointing for hers, is thinking, I want rotating point of view, or I'm choosing first person, or I'm choosing alternate parallel timelines. So I just finished, I don't know if anyone has read The Alice Network. Reese Witherspoon just bought it for like $1 bazillion to make it a movie. But it's an interesting book if you're interested in sort of parallel time frames, because the book is told from rotating points of view. So one is a character who was a spy during World War I, and she was a part of what was called the Alice Network. So it's the story of what happened to her and these spies. And the second timeline is a young woman in 1947. So it's right after World War II. And she's come to Europe to look for her cousin who disappeared during the war. No one has heard from her. And through sort of a series of events, she ends up, I guess, hiring the woman who was the spy in 1915 to help her find her cousin. So the older woman is talking about what happened in the First War, and that story is totally separate and yet connected to the story happening in quote unquote present time, or 1947, because what's happening there is educating us to, strangely enough, what has happened to the cousin. So it's an interesting sort of example of that. So thinking about structure, and at least for myself,
Oops.
it's funny. I get this bouncy noise when she's about
Yes.
to go out.
There we are. I knew we were frozen because Crystal had her finger on her nose and wasn't moving. It was just, there was no tapping.
Look, right?
Yeah, it was just one long thought. So as I say, for me, for a long time, I never thought about structure. I just wrote what felt comfortable, which was first person point of view. But I think you have so many choices. The very kind of next thing that I had highlighted in the handy writing tools was all around reading more critically as a writer. So he talks about, stopping yourself and, as you're reading, saying to yourself, what's happening here, and why did the author make the choice to change point of view there? And what am I getting from this character's point of view that I didn't? So certainly, Cynthia, looking at a book like Gone Girl, where there's rotating point
of view.
Thanks, Bonnie.
You get different parts.
There you are. So, yeah. Someone was like, I wonder when I stop talking to the rest of the group. But there are certainly a lot of thrillers that have that sort of rotating point of view. There's one called The Other Mrs. Parrish, which is interesting. And that's done rotating point of view, but in big sections. So you get like a big 1/3 of the book from one character's point of view, and then all of a sudden you start to realize, oh, that's not the full story. There's another one called The Other Wife, which also has that kind of different point of view, which is very different than something book that's really person point of view. So I'm curious for other people.
Yeah. We're curious too.
There we go.
She likes to build suspense. It's what she does.
You're curious.
But you will never know.
Dun, dun,
Okay.
dun.
So my question was that I asked to myself is, did anyone want to share like what structure they're doing? So I will pick on poor Cynthia because she actually volunteered at first. She's like, I so wish I hadn't done that. Why are you doing rotating point of view?
Well, it's a challenge. Actually, I set it as a challenge for myself. I always try to have something, like kill somebody, first person, third person, whatever. So I'm just working through the list. But for this particular story, I thought it would be interesting to tell it from the different points of view because the characters are so rich. There's a murder or an attempted murder. It turns out somebody does die, but not the person that was intended. But there's a teenager involved who's really peculiar and manipulative. And
so a teenager?
But there's also a husband who's really manipulative. So a husband. sorry, male husbands out there, but no. But it's the characters each give something significant away to somebody, like for seemingly no reason because they get manipulated out of it. And I just thought it'd be interesting to hear how it's played from each of the characters. So
I think I mentioned last time the book The Party by Robin Harding.
I think it's Robin Harding she's trying to say there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Crystal.
Because it has
Robin Harding. Okay.
I'll check that out.
Frozen for a long time this time.
Yeah.
Rowan,
She's gone.
Somebody else can go. Talk about structure.
There we go.
It's over.
somebody else could go.
Thank you, Cynthia. I needed that. But yeah, I was saying Robin Harding, The Party, has really nice different point of view, including some from a teen point of view.
Oh, okay.
Does someone else want to say what kind of structure they're choosing and why?
Well, I'm doing a first person point of view, but the character kind of has this thing where she splits into these personalities in her head. It's kind of like her little yin and yang. She ends up naming them Drama Girl and Rational Girl. And because it allows her, she's an only child and she's working through stuff and she's lost her foil, her best friend who's like super enthusiastic. And so she's kind of put them in her head to kind of cope with everything that's happening. And my struggle has been how to portray those. And I think I've come up with, I'm going to write them like a script. I'm going to have Rational Girl and then her conversation and then Drama Girl, because she has these three-way conversations in her head. So it's actually been a bit of a challenge, but these voices are real characters in the book. So I want them to have some weight. So that's certainly been a challenge for me to do that. And they disappear at the end. So I want to show that that's kind of her kind of putting everything together, not needing them anymore. Now, I think she's frozen. She looks kind of frozen. Or else she's really thinking about what I said.
She's really thinking about it. It's very intense.
Very intense.
Locked up.
You
wait.
stunned her.
That was so good, Leslie.
Did you hear anything? Oh, she's gone.
I just couldn't move.
Did you hear any of it? Did you hear it? Gone.
I heard script, and now I'm gone again. Wait.
And now I'm gone again.
I'm just gone again.
Yeah, the best.
Best.
Okay.
My goodness, you're having trouble.
I heard script-like, rational girl and drama girl, and sort of going back and forth in that sort of script format. That's what I heard.
Okay, well, that's basically what I said, and a lot of other blathering. So.
Which I imagine was riveting if I had heard it.
It was, right? Riveting,
Well,
right?
it stunned you, so.
Stunned her.
Up on YouTube, this little silly thing. We keep laughing. It's happening.
Everyone else is nodding. Yes.
Time.
People watching are going to go,
Lord have mercy.
Are they really learning anything? They're just laughing away.
There's no fun in learning.
Sure there is.
Yeah, I have no idea why. We've never had this kind of technical glitch, which will be fun to try and figure out at a later date. Christy, I'm curious, in your book, why are you choosing to stay in Sam's point of view? Because you have multiple interesting characters and you could be telling the story from all of their point of view. So I'm curious why you made that choice.
That's a very good question. Could you just read now and then I'll think about it?
Yeah, probably. So hang on.
I don't know if it was consciously not doing other points of view. It was certainly consciously, for me, it was Sam's story. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, it started as a screenplay, right? So you're not really in anybody's head in the screenplay. It's just unfolding in front of you. And so in a way, it's sort of a more omniscient point of view.
Yeah.
But when I decided to write it as a novel, it was certainly an active decision that I thought Sam deserves to have more of his story told and to have more of him revealed. And that's why I thought the novel format would serve him better. Yeah, so there certainly was a conscious. Now, having said that, when I started writing it as a novel, I started in first person, but really didn't like it because I'm trying to inject a lot of humor into it. And although it's in Sam's point of view, he's not really in good humor.
Yeah.
So I think the third person, sort of what I even call it, limited omniscient, but it's still in his point of view. But I'm kind of allowing myself to have a lot of fun and injecting humor that he himself wouldn't feel. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually when, kind of going full spectrum to what we started talking about earlier, is if you find yourself stuck or having a hard time figuring out kind of what happens next, it can be really interesting to take a scene and write it from another character's point of view. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, again, under...
Oh, here we go again.
Repeat, please.
Okay, I feel like I'd have to start talking faster.
Hold up cards.
Yeah. That having a scene where, if you're stuck, you write it from another character's point of view, you can unlock maybe what they're seeing or their reaction to something, which then makes you go back and reflect, wait a minute, what would my character's perspective? And, I talk a lot that all of us, from a counseling perspective, one of the things that we know is that we interpret things through our own lens. So, if you come down the stairs and you're a teen girl and your mom says, oh, you're wearing that, we have a reaction to that may not be at all what she had intended. Like, her question truly might have been like, I thought that was in the laundry, or I thought you gave that to Goodwill last year. So she's, not making any judgment call, but because we filter it through that. So when you're in one character's point of view, you're almost inside their head and you might start getting lost within their own perceptions. So saying, okay, now I'm going to write this same scene. So now I'm writing the scene where Sam's at the soccer field and someone's trying to share the story with him. Like, what is their take? Like, do they feel like Sam is ignoring them, that he's not hearing? Or are they trying to communicate something, again, that may be different than what Sam heard when you were in his head? So sometimes that exercise, even though you may end up throwing all of it away or it's just a useful writing prompt, can be a really useful way of sort of digging into that.
Yeah, and that's interesting you bring that up, because in Sam's scene on the soccer field, where he ends up getting so angry because his daughter's been hurt, and he gets mad at Nico, who is coaching Lucille's team, and And he's so mad at Nico, and he's so mad at Alfredo, who's kind of taken away from the game, and he hasn't been able to see his daughter playing, nor has he seen her injured. So now she's injured. So of course he has this guilt that he wasn't there, but he's really mad at all of his friends, but certainly at Nico at that moment. So, but what he doesn't realize, and he's not told this actually, Nico does not tell him. Eventually his daughter does. But his daughter actually started fighting with him. And the other girl, trying to get away, ended up cutting her throat with her cleave. And so it's really Lucille's fault that she got injured. And Sam doesn't realize that. And Nico is not telling him that. And so it was really interesting to really think about that whole idea of, so as a friend, what would Nico say or not say? And he's very protective of Sam. And Sam doesn't really realize that until now. She's frozen with awe.
She is totally frozen with awe. It's amazing, Christy.
It's so fantastic. Like, let's just send it in now. I don't have to do right.
I didn't zone out at all. It was totally amazing.
I'm going to try turning off my.
It's off.
Yeah, you just turned that off.
Yeah, it's good.
She's gone.
Oh, wow.
It's gonna come back.
It's actually on my screen. Every once in a while, it'll come up and say that Creative Academy has low bandwidth.
Oh.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't see that.
I don't get
Yeah,
that.
it's come up a few times on Eileen's face, like on that.
Poor Eileen.
Yeah, I know. She has low bandwidth. I'm sorry.
It's her problem. Is she coming back? Come back, Eileen.
Back, Eileen.
Logging off, logging on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christy, how far are you into the novel, into your writing?
I'm I would say I probably have about a quarter of it to do now. So it's getting close. And what I'm finding is the chapters that I'm in right now, because a whole bunch of stuff is now being revealed, and I wasn't sure how, I didn't think it was going to be revealed this way. And so now there's this thing that happens, and I'm like, oh, is that happening now? I thought that was much later. So I was like, oh, so is this like too, because I have so many things happening, because Eileen says, yeah, like be mean to Sam. Okay, fine. But it's like, oh my God, I didn't realize that was going to happen now. And so it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
All right, did you enjoy that discussion without me?
Yep.
Just filling the gap.
Yeah,
We discussed your bandwidth.
Yes.
yeah. We have
That was the
high-speed
message
internet.
that came
I
up,
don't. Yeah.
that you have low bandwidth.
Yes, I do actually. So, Bonnie, how are you finding doing the rotating point of view? Because initially you felt that you had one character really well, and then one character maybe not as well.
Well, when I first draft, I write everybody's point of view.
I think she's frozen.
She is frozen.
Okay. You can tell
So-
us.
Keep going. It'll be recording. As
Still
you're
regarding. So I write everyone's point of view.
Okay,
And
I tried to do it without video. Maybe that will make a difference.
okay, so you can hear us, right?
I can actually see and hear you. You just can't see me.
So when I go back in for the second draft, I decide whose point of view is actually important to the story and driving the story. Because sometimes it's just a minor character, and I don't know. Somehow the way that I draft, it comes out as multiple point of views. So this story actually had 7 point of views.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yes. So I've knocked it down to 3. I might knock it down to 2. Usually there's 2 main characters, and I find that I like to show people in different circumstances reflecting the same problem and how they're dealing with them. So that's why I tend to like the 2 point of views. I also like showing how other people think of my main character, because how we think of ourselves is quite different than how other people think of us. And I just am really fascinated by that and how it can be so different. So I consciously love multiple point of views. But I have written in single point of views, and I have written in first person as well. So it's just for this particular story, because I was doing dragons and people, I really wanted the dragon's point of view on what their lives and their story was like, rather than just the human point of view. So it was a very conscious decision to pick at least one dragon. And as I said, there is a third person who's in there, but it is more for the magical side of my world, because it can get quite complicated, and my human doesn't know anything about it. And my second point of view dragon is dealing more with his world and his place in it and his situations. So yeah, narrowed it down to 3.
So I was nodding and then realized you can't see me nodding. Like I'm all like, yeah.
That's all right. I watched Cynthia and Crystal and Christy nod. I can't see Leslie. She's just ahead. I got feedback from them.
Cynthia nodded.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. So Leslie, how are you feeling about the structure that you've chosen for your book?
Well, I think I like the idea of doing the script for laying it out, and I like the first person very much, because it's very much an internal struggle with the character, and I really wanted the reader to go through it with her, because it's basically all in her head. I mean, things happen to her, but it's how she's got this really altered, her lens is really distorted, and so I have, her mother say something to her and her take it absolutely the wrong way, and her friend goes, "What are you talking about?" So I wanted to show right from the beginning that she's looking at the world through this distorted lens, and then I just have people interacting with her, making little comments, going, so that the reader can understand that she's not got the right take on this at all. So for me, that was really important to have the first person for that. So, and I think I'm happy with that. It was these voices in her head that were challenging me a little bit. So
we're doing Eileen's looks for you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm doing them by myself.
I might be exaggerating. I'm sorry.
No, that was no exaggeration at all. I could not see any exaggeration. So did people find the process of starting to think in terms of a mission statement useful?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm freely going to admit I've never done it before. Like, I do find that I never thought of it as a mission statement, but I do find that when I'm in that kind of second round of revisions is when I tend to ask myself the question, what is this story really about? Which maybe in some sense is a form of sort of a mission statement, but that's when I realize, for example, again with
oh no, now we can't see or hear her.
Oh, she's robotic.
Girl, I thought it was all about friendship, and
does she know that
I talk to myself for never myself.
It was all about talking to yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Friendship.
Yep.
Yeah.
Something about girl, friendship, and talking to yourself.
Yeah, that's about what we got. She gone?
I'll never know.
He is gone, girl.
Yeah. Reverting to our other point of view.
Yeah.
Unreliable narrator.
Definitely an unreliable narrative.
I don't know if I like that you talk without me. This concerns me.
A little too much fun. Huh?
Yeah, I come back and there's a lot of laughing, and that makes me very anxious.
No.
So
we'll see what records.
For the
Yes, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, you can find the mission statement is what you want people to take from your story, or I'm not quite clear on what that needs to be. Is she there?
I think, hopefully you can hear me, I
Yep.
think that it is a little bit of both. It's what you want someone to take from your story and what you want to accomplish with that piece.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's just a way of kind of going back and, when we started talking at the start of the session, I said, any book is a journey. So I'm taking you to Seattle for this trip, or I'm taking you on this kind of trip. It's a way of touching base of, how do I want to get there? Is this a slow meandering trip down, the back roads? Am I trying to write a fast pace, speeding through traffic, Ferrari fueled, Mad Max trip down to Seattle? Am I trying to take a boat to Seattle? How am I trying to accomplish that? So that you can then kind of go back and measure yourself against that.
Is it okay that your story kind of speeds up and slows down? Doesn't have to be all the same pacing through? I'm thinking at the beginning of my novel right now is quite fast paced. Lots of things are happening, but it's about to slow down and get sort of more internal.
Any questions?
Oh, I'm sad. That was such a good question.
You're laughing again, and that's all I know.
Oh, yeah. Well, I asked a really good question, but you missed it all.
Ask it again.
Are you there?
I am.
Okay. I said, is it okay that your story speeds up and slows down? Because the beginning of mine is quite fast paced, and it's about to slow down and be a little bit more internal, and then it's going to pick up again. I know Christy's writing this boom, this story that's going to drive right through the whole narrative. And I know some stories are slower. Are you there?
Yes.
But, mine is definitely going fast and slow and fast and slow. And is that okay?
The answer, of course, is it's hard to say yes or no.
Okay.
But generally, yes. Like, stories can have a heartbeat where they are, faster pace, more action, and then reflective, and then faster pace. And what you want to avoid is having people feel like they suddenly dropped into two different books.
Okay.
And that's where sometimes you can have two different tones happening. So that you kind of want to avoid, where people are suddenly like, this feels like a completely different book. But if it's, again, a heartbeat where they're kind of coming and going, that can work really well. Did anyone else have any questions or care to laugh maniacally at me while I'm not here?
No, but
we're
you're here.
laughing with you, not
Yes. Yes.
you're just not here to hear it.
We just labeled you an unreliable narrator. That's all. We were practicing our point of view.
We were.
Well, very well done. Thank you.
I wondered if you could give us the name, and I think it's a craft book, of, is it the Emotional Thesaurus?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I have that one.
So is that what it's called, the Emotional Thesaurus?
Well, yeah, there's an emotional wound one, and then there's an emotions thesaurus, and then there's a whole series of them. So there's one that's all about positive traits and one that's all about negative traits, and there's a whole series on settings. So like urban settings and farms, and like there's maybe 10 or 12 or 13 books in that sort of set.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
I really like the emotional wound one. I use that for every story.
Absolutely. That one actually solved my story problem for me. I had a blue pencil with Angela, and because that was what I was missing. I had identified the deep emotional wound, but I hadn't threaded it through the story, and love that one. That's fantastic.
So that's what it's called, the Emotional Wound.
Thesaurus, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, it looks just precisely like this.
Oh, Emotional Wound Thesaurus. Okay.
Complete with stickies. Yours won't come with stickies. You'll have to put your own.
You have to put in your own stickies, Christy.
Thank you,
That seems fair. Thank you, Crystal.
That's how you personalize it.
I will add that to the resource list for the class.
And they do have a website. So the website, for free, publicly accessible, you can get maybe a fifth of the book. on their website. So you can look at stuff that's there. And then they have like a monthly subscription thing or an annual subscription thing you can do. And that unlocks all of it digitally. So, yeah, or you can buy it as an ebook or a print book or whatever. But
Right.
yeah, it is. There's a bunch that's on there. So you can troll through what they have and see if that's a good fit.
Oh, thanks, Crystal.
Thank you, Crystal. Well, that's been fun. All right, so
Can I say something, or is it time to go?
no, go ahead.
Oh, just about mission statements, because there was some question about that. I spent a lot of years working in museums, which are not-for-profit, and we really put a lot of emphasis into mission statements every year, and and that drove all of our activities. And I think if you're curious about how to write a mission statement, because I think artists typically don't think about doing that, so it's kind of a new idea. But there's certainly a lot of there's a lot of resources on the internet for how to draft a mission statement and the key components that you should include, so that you're clear about what your purpose is. And actually, I think that's a really good idea. I never thought about doing it for my projects.
So
as a writer,
So you will actually be getting a newsletter on Friday. And actually the topic of that is a little bit on mission statements, and it'll have some links onto, because I'm going to encourage people to write a mission statement for their writing career. So you can do it certainly for a project, but also kind of, as Cynthia's saying, something to drive your focus.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this will be really fun to see how this sucker records.
Probably have about 15 minutes of content.
Yeah, spread out over the hour. So yeah, that'll be fun. But I thank everyone to sticking with me, and I will see if I can sort out why we're having internet issues. But it does seem to be me and not you guys. So I think there must be something on my end. So I will attempt to sort that out. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a good week.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.